Hi! Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Your support means a lot. Let's get started.
One day at a time, Evelyn sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The house was silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. It was the kind of silence that filled the air with an almost unbearable weight. Outside, the world carried on as usual. Cars passed. People walked, children played. But inside, it felt as though time itself had come to a standstill. She hadn't heard from him in days, not since that argument. The words they had exchanged, harsh and unforgiving, echoed in her mind. How had it come to this? How had their once happy home turned into a battleground of unresolved tensions? Her fingers drummed absently on the armrest, the rhythmic sound almost comforting. But it couldn't drown out the noise inside her mind, the doubts, the guilt, the overwhelming sense of loss. She missed him, more than she wanted to admit. Even after everything that had happened, she still missed him. But Evelyn knew, deep down, that it wasn't just him she missed. It was the version of herself that she had lost along the way. The person she had been before everything had fallen apart. Before the weight of responsibilities, the disappointments, and the unspoken words had buried her under their crushing pressure. She glanced at the clock. It was late afternoon now, and still, no word, no call. He hadn't even returned her messages. Evelyn didn't know what to expect anymore. There was no magic moment when everything would click back into place. No sudden resolution to fix the mess they had made. All she had left were the memories, those fragments of a life they had built together, now broken and scattered. She stood up slowly, her joints stiff from sitting for so long, and moved toward the door. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, hesitating. She wasn't sure where she was going, or what she hoped to find. Maybe it was just the need to escape, to step outside of the suffocating silence that had become her life. As she opened the door, a gust of wind swept in, carrying with it the scent of rain. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool air wash over her. For a brief second, she felt something distant but familiar. It was as if the world was offering her a chance to breathe again, to start over. But Evelyn knew that wasn't how it worked. There were no easy fixes, no fresh starts without consequences. She stepped outside, leaving the door slightly ajar behind her, and walked down the path to nowhere in particular. The sky was overcast, the clouds heavy with the promise of rain. As she walked, her mind wandered to the past, the good times, the bad times, the moments that had seemed so small at the time but now weighed so heavily on her heart. It wasn't just the arguments, the silence, or the distance between them that hurt. It was the realization that she had let things slip away, that she hadn't fought hard enough to keep what they had. The love, the connection they had both just let it fade. And now, Evelyn wasn't sure if it was too late to fix it. The rain began to fall slowly, at first just a few drops, then heavier, until it washed over the streets in a steady stream. Evelyn didn't notice the wetness creeping into her shoes as she walked, lost in her thoughts. The sound of the raindrops hitting the pavement was almost soothing, a gentle reminder that the world kept moving, regardless of her internal storm. Was it too late to fix it? Had she already pushed him too far? The fear of losing him had started to settle deep in her chest, a constant ache that wouldn't go away. But even more than that, it was the fear of losing herself, of forgetting who she was without him, of not knowing how to find her way back. She found herself standing at the edge of the park, the swing swaying gently in the breeze. It was a place she and Adam used to visit often, before the tension had started to build between them. She could still remember the way he had pushed her on the swings, laughing as she told him to go higher, higher until it felt like she could touch the sky. Those were the moments that had seemed endless, full of joy and promise. But now it felt like a distant memory, as if it had happened in another life. Evelyn sat on one of the swings, letting her legs dangle beneath her, the cold metal of the chain digging into her palms as she gripped it tightly. Her thoughts returned to the last fight they'd had. She had been so angry at him for not understanding her, for not listening, for always being too focused on the things that didn't matter. But in hindsight, she realized that she hadn't listened to him either. She hadn't heard the unspoken things, the quiet pleas for understanding, for space. What had she expected? That the words would fix everything. That one argument would be the thing that tore them apart. She had been so sure that she was right, so convinced that her feelings were the only ones that mattered. But now, sitting in the rain, she saw the truth. It wasn't just about the fight. It was about all the little things that had gone unsaid, all the ways they had drifted apart without even realizing it. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, her shoulders hunched against the chill. The rain was now falling in sheets, and the park had emptied, the benches and paths deserted. Evelyn didn't mind. She was used to being alone with her thoughts. The problem wasn't being alone, it was the quiet, the space that was left between her and Adam. The sound of footsteps approaching pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, startled, as she saw a figure standing at the edge of the park. It was Adam. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she didn't know whether to stand or stay seated. The space between them felt enormous, as though every step he took toward her would only make the distance greater. But he didn't move at first, standing in the rain, watching her. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. Evelyn didn't know what to say. There was so much to say, so many things she wanted to apologize for, to explain, to try to fix. But the words didn't come. Instead, she just nodded, as if that small gesture could bridge the gap that had grown between them. "I'm sorry," Adam continued, his voice rough. "I don't know how we got here. I don't know how we lost each other." Evelyn swallowed, her throat tight. She wanted to tell him everything, that she was sorry too, that she had messed up, that she still loved him, even after everything. But all she could do was look at him, as the rain continued to fall between them. The silence now heavy, but somehow less suffocating. It was a moment of uncertainty, a fragile pause in time. The rain, the distance, the unsaid words, they all hung in the air, as if the world was waiting for them to decide what came next. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, but the air remained thick with tension. Evelyn stood motionless, her eyes locked on Adam. The world around them felt distant, muted, just the two of them, standing in the middle of a park that used to be filled with laughter and light. Now it was a place of heavy silence, each drop of rain carrying the weight of everything they had said and left unsaid. Adam took a tentative step forward, the sound of his boots against the wet ground snapping Evelyn from her thoughts. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. Yet the space between them still felt vast. The rain had soaked through his jacket, his hair clinging to his forehead, but none of it seemed to matter. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Adam said, his voice quiet, but steady, "about what we've become, what I've become. I know I haven't been the person you needed, Evelyn. I've been so focused on everything else that I forgot what mattered the most, what we had, what we still have, if we want it." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, the words she had been afraid to say rising within her. She had never imagined Adam would be the one to speak first, to admit his faults so openly. The truth was, she had been too afraid to even look at the mess they'd made, too afraid to confront the reality of their relationship. She had buried herself in her work, in her own insecurities, thinking that maybe time would heal everything. But time hadn't healed anything. It had only made the distance between them grow, like a rift that could never be mended. "I don't know if we can go back to what we were," Evelyn said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't even know if I can find my way back to myself. But I know that I don't want to lose you. I don't want us to end like this, like we never mattered." Adam's eyes softened, his hand reaching out as if to bridge the gap between them. He didn't touch her, not yet, but the gesture was enough. "We can't go back, Evelyn," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "But we can move forward, together, one step at a time." Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to escape. She had been holding on to her anger, her hurt for so long, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, to allow herself to feel the depth of her emotions again. And now, standing here with Adam, with the rain falling gently around them, she realized something. The hardest part wasn't admitting the mistakes. It was letting go of the fear of being hurt again, of losing herself completely. "I don't know if I can do that," she whispered. "What if I'm not the person you need anymore? What if I've changed too much?" Adam stepped closer, his presence a quiet comfort. "You don't have to be the person you were, Evelyn. You just have to be you." The person I fell in love with, even with all the mistakes, all the cracks. Because those things, they're part of us now. They don't make us weaker, they make us stronger. We just have to be honest with each other and with ourselves. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest. The ache of uncertainty slowly beginning to fade. It wasn't a perfect solution. Not yet. There were still so many things to work through, so many unspoken truths to unravel. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. A spark that perhaps this wasn't the end, but a new beginning. With a shaky breath, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it was everything. The world didn't change in an instant, and they didn't have all the answers. But they were no longer standing in the rain, separated by the walls they had built. For the first time in what felt like forever, they were just people, willing to try again. I don't know what's going to happen, Evelyn said, her voice steadier now, but I'm willing to find out. If you are. Adam smiled, a genuine, soft smile that reached his eyes. I'm willing. And together, they stood in the rain, no longer afraid to face what came next. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a fresh, cool scent in the air. The streets were damp, reflecting the dim light of the street lamps as they flickered on, casting long shadows on the ground. Evelyn and Adam stood together, side by side, as if the weight of the world had momentarily been lifted off their shoulders. Neither of them spoke immediately, but there was a sense of quiet understanding between them. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Evelyn took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs in a way it hadn't for so long. For the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel: peace. The kind of peace that came from acceptance, from realizing that life wasn't always about finding the perfect answers, but about being willing to keep going, even when the road was uncertain. I think we've both been holding on to a lot of pain, Evelyn said quietly, her voice breaking the stillness. I've been angry with you, but I've been angry with myself too. Adam looked over at her, his eyes soft. I know, I've been holding on to my own mistakes, my own fears, but I think maybe I've been afraid of losing you so much that I forgot how to fight for us. She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Fear had ruled their relationship for so long: fear of failure, fear of change, fear of the unknown. But now, standing in the quiet of the park, they both understood that fear didn't have to control them anymore. They had faced the truth of their feelings, even the hard parts. And that was the first step toward healing. What now? Evelyn asked, her voice hesitant but hopeful. Where do we go from here? Adam reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The touch was simple, but it felt like a promise. One day at a time, he said. We take it one day at a time, and we keep talking. We keep trying. And if we stumble, we get back up and keep moving forward. Evelyn's heart swelled, the simple sincerity of his words settling deep within her. She had spent so much time in her own head, overthinking every possibility, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to just be present. To simply exist alongside someone she loved. I don't have all the answers, she said softly, but I want to try. I want to be the person who can still believe in us, even if it's hard. Adam squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing gently over her skin. We don't need all the answers, Evelyn. We just need each other. The world around them seemed to quiet once more, as if holding its breath, waiting to see what they would do next. In that moment, the uncertainty of the future didn't feel as daunting. They had come so far through the hurt, the silence, the broken pieces, and somehow they had found their way back to each other. As they walked home, side by side, the night seemed less heavy, the path ahead more manageable. It wasn't a fairy tale, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, both Evelyn and Adam felt like they were no longer alone. The road ahead was unknown, but it was theirs to walk together, and that, in itself, was enough.